Good evening and welcome to tonight's Fireside Chat with Lyndon LaRouche for Thursday, August 4th. And tonight is a special presentation which Bill Jones will be giving. And, of course, we will be commenting on the recent assault on Taiwan by Nancy Pelosi. And also a corresponding verbal assault she made on Taiwan, which we'll also reference. We want to start, however, by making sure that everyone is aware that our organization is involved in a campaign to force a confrontation with the truth in not only Ukraine and not only in NATO or in the United States, but a sort of confrontation with the truth on the part of the American people. What has happened is that back on July 14th, something by the name of the Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation released a list of over 70 persons that they considered to be enemies of the state, and they were referred to as information terrorists. Leading that list were 30 persons that had spoken at Schiller Institute conferences. And number 2 on the list was Helga Sepp-LaRouche. Others that appear on the list are Tulsi Gabbard, former Congresswoman, presently serving Senator Rand Paul, and many journalists and others. One of them, Scott Ritter, known for his work both recently on Ukraine and opposing the narrative on Ukraine that people have been caused to go with in the United States. But he's known, of course, earlier for his work as part of UNSCOM, the UN Special Commission that investigated weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And what he did at the time was to expose attempts to use the weapons inspections team for the purpose of conducting spying and also a potential coup against Saddam Hussein. This was after the first war of 1991, Operation Desert Storm. He wrote a book about it at the time. So he put out a statement, and he put out several statements, but there was a commentary that he published yesterday in Consortium News. And in that commentary, he prominently featured one of the persons that was on the list, who was Diane Sayre, an independent candidate for United States Senate in New York. And so I'm going to go to the section where he actually, I'll do two things. I'll reference what he says about Senator Rand Paul, and then go to Diane. He first points out that Senator Rand Paul had made an effort in the United States Senate to get an inspector general assigned to oversee the over $40 billion that was going into Ukraine, because his point was, we've done this often. We did it in Iraq, where untold billions of dollars went unaccounted for. We don't want to do that. And so at the time when he tried to do that, at the point that the vote on allocating the money to Ukraine came up, he was roundly criticized, including by Chuck Schumer at that point, and saying that his actions, quote, served to strengthen Putin's hand. What Ritter pointed out is that what Schumer didn't say was that, an inspector general would have exposed the role that U.S. funds played to exact political revenge on the man who tried to inject a modicum of accountability into how monies appropriated by Congress are spent, namely Rand Paul himself. What he's referring to is that funds went from the United States Congress to the government of Ukraine to pay employees of the government of Ukraine, and the Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation is an official part of what's called the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. So the fact is that the people that are denouncing American citizens like Rand Paul and American officials like Rand Paul as information terrorists and saying that they will be brought to account, that they're being paid by U.S. taxpayer money that Rand Paul was caused to vote for without the provision of an inspector general to even oversee it. So he points out that first. And then he says, but there is more. And he talks about Diane, identifying her as a LaRouche candidate. Diane Sare was singled out by the Schumer-funded, State Department-supported Center for Countering Disinformation as an information terrorist who should be prosecuted as a, quote, war criminal because of her public stance challenging the narrative about the Ukraine conflict. This is all quote. That's right. Chuck Schumer helped create the organizational structures which have attacked the reputation of a challenger for his Senate seat, threatening her with political violence and more for the crime, quote unquote, of challenging Schumer on the issue of Ukraine. What Chuck Schumer has done in using U.S. taxpayer money to attack his political opponents is un-American. One can only hope that the New York voters see it the same way come November. Now, the reason I wanted to start with that, other than the fact that it's a very important document and it's a step that Scott Ritter has taken that people have rarely taken, all too rarely in the United States, to directly identify the attempts to suppress Lyndon LaRouche or Lyndon LaRouche Associates. But that goes way beyond that, because what's really going on here is that a blunder has been made by persons associated with the State Department and NATO, not merely Ukraine, in allowing for the focus on this specific deployment by intelligence agencies together with military forces to attempt to suppress opponents. Now, obviously, that's not democratic. And certainly if you look at Zelensky's having banned now 13 political parties. It was 11 up until about 4 days ago, and another 2 were added. When you look at that, and you have the United States financing this government to the tune of tens of billions of dollars on the premise that it is some sort of cynosure of democracy, some sort of exemplar of democracy, there's an issue, which is that this fraud must be exposed. And it must be exposed not merely to the American people, but the reasons for exposing it were on lurid display in Taiwan. So I only want to do one thing for people as a public service, because Nancy Pelosi said some things there. And I want to make sure that, and she basically tried to invoke Benjamin Franklin. And in defense of Benjamin Franklin, I want to first of all tell you what Benjamin Franklin actually said. And then I will tell you what Nancy Pelosi claimed Benjamin Franklin said. So Benjamin Franklin said this: those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Okay? Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. That's Benjamin Franklin. Okay? This is what Nancy Pelosi stated. Benjamin Franklin, our presidency, said, freedom and democracy. Freedom and democracy are one thing. Security here. We can't have either if we don't have both. So security, economic, security, economy, again, they're all, and governance, they're all related. Okay, now that's exactly what she said. Now, also, last time I checked, at least, Benjamin Franklin was not president of the United States, and she certainly didn't describe how exactly she meant what she said about Benjamin Franklin, our presidency. So just before Bill gets started, I thought I should just let you know that. I'd also, just as a footnote, like to tell you that in 2017, a pharmacist, Washington, D.C. pharmacist by the name of Mike Kim, said about the prescriptions he fills out for people on Capitol Hill. He said, quote, at first it's cool, and then you realize I'm filling out some drugs that are for some pretty serious health problems as well. And these are the people that are running the country, Kim said, listing treatments for conditions like diabetes and Alzheimer's. Quote, it makes you kind of sit back and say, wow, they're making the highest laws of the land, and they might not even remember what happened yesterday. With that comforting thought, I'm now going to ask Bill to go ahead and give you his picture of what is happening. There are many other predicates, many other things we can add in discussion. So, Bill, take it away.
Okay. All right. I think the only problem that Nancy Pelosi in taking this Asia trip, which is always very strenuous, is probably the mental health problem more than anything physical, even though she's 82 years old and kind of on her last legs here. But I think people are acquainted with this, but I'd like to go through the background of why this has caused such a furor. Congress people have been visiting Taiwan on various occasions and the like, and it always raises a stink. And there's always, from Beijing side, there's always something said about it because it is, a violation in one sense. But this was something entirely different, and because of what it was, it has created a sea change in world history. I mean, the world after Nancy Pelosi's visit is no longer the same, and it's entirely new geometry, and I'll tell you why. The background, however, is that when the United States, after about 12, 15 years in not recognizing the victory of the Chinese Revolution in 1949, but rather trying to uphold a group of refugees from that revolution, including Chiang Kai-shek, who was the former head of government in Taiwan, and using that as the government, as the recognized government of China. They received the post. Chiang Kai-shek received the post of the China seat in the United Nations, and for all those years, through the Korean War and many years after that, there was just no recognition at all of China, which at that time had about 500 million people. Still one of the largest countries in the world. Very poor, but nevertheless a very populous country that could not be ignored. Other countries had relations with China during that period, but not the United States. But when thanks to the independence movements in Africa and Asia, in the United Nations, there became a majority of countries who were not part of the so-called Western Alliance, were not part the Western forces in World War II or the allies of the United States, but that they were totally independent. Some of them were friendly with the United States, some were friendly with the Soviet Union, some of them were friendly with China, but they were independent nations who didn't have to follow the lead of the United States in many respects politically. And as they went into the United Nations, of course, and they saw and they knew that there was a nation of 500 million people growing to 1 billion people that was unrepresented, or was represented by a group of people representing probably a few million on the island of Taiwan, they decided to change that. And over a period of time, they had the votes where they could make the proposition that the People's Republic of China, which was founded in 1949, would become the representative of China, the only representative. Taiwan would lose that post, and China would assume it. And that was really kind of a global international decision that was made in 1971. Now, following that, of course, you had the obvious, people were looking here in the United States at trying to change the situation where we do not recognize, or we had not recognized, a country of almost 500 million people. John F. Kennedy, this was on his agenda for the second administration. We know that. He wouldn't do it during the first because he knew it was a hot potato, and if he did do it during the first, he would not become president in the second administration. But he made it clear to some of his associates, who later told the story, that he was going to do it. In fact, the last thing he said at the last press conference, that he ever gave, was a question on China. He says, yes, at some point we're going to have to see to it that we can begin working even with Red China. And that was part of his problem. And then, of course, he was killed, and that slowed things down quite a bit. But there, of course, was an understanding that at some point it had to happen. Then you had the Kissinger visit, the Nixon visit, and all of that led to the fact that we began to talk with the Chinese, began to talk about setting up a relationship with them. And the agreement was the Chinese were favorable to this. The Chinese had problems with the United States, obviously, in the Korean War, which they didn't start, but being allied with North Korea, and more importantly with the Soviet Union, which was supportive of the moves by the North Korean leadership into South Korea, which started the whole thing, that China also had to play a role, and they did. They sent volunteers there. Many people, many Chinese soldiers as volunteers were killed during the Korean War. But so that there were those kind of problems, but they were inclined to try and work together with the United States. In fact, during World War II, it is not known to a lot of people, Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai, who were leading the Northern Rebellion. It was a separate operation from Chiang Kai-shek during the war, but they nevertheless had a sort of agreement or alliance, because the common enemy was Japan, that they wanted to talk to Franklin Roosevelt to try and get some kind of recognition for themselves in a coalition government. And they were, Mao Zedong, who had never flown in an airplane, he was ready to get on a plane and to take this journey over the Pacific or however they had to go. I guess they had to go through Europe at that time. Didn't have such long flights, flight-capable vehicles. But he was willing to do that, and that was nixed by the American leadership in China at the time, which was working closely with Chiang Kai-shek before the split came. So that didn't work. So there was this old relation. They worked with U.S. soldiers during World War II to fight the Japanese. They rescued American flyers. They rescued the mission of the bombing of Tokyo when in 1942. They rescued those flyers who had to bail out over China. So they had that. There was not an enmity, even during there's never been an enmity between China and the United States, generally throughout our history. Abraham Lincoln worked with the Chinese, and most American governments were supportive of China's attempt to become an independent nation. But because of the Korean War, there was a lot of tension there, so it took a lot of time to get that started. The agreement of China, the bottom line for them was that we will establish relations with the United States, but the United States has got to commit to the fact that we are China, that this old relationship with, the Chiang Kai-shek, which was used as a geopolitical gimmick against the People's Republic, could no longer be the case, and that they had to accept that Taiwan, which for 1,400 years had been a part of China, separated only when the Japanese beat the Chinese in 1895, and from 1895 to 1945, Japan controlled Taiwan. But after the war, we wanted all these old relations to go back, that China should have its territory back, the Japanese should not have the right to keep that, and that Taiwan was, during the Cairo conference between Roosevelt, Churchill, and Chiang Kai-shek, they agreed that Taiwan was a part of China and that would be returned to China after the war. War was not over at that time. This was reconfirmed by Truman at the Potsdam Conference. So the legality of this thing is crystal clear. Nevertheless, the United States, more and more, they first of all agreed to that. I mean, they signed the agreement, the so-called three communiques, part of which says that we recognize only one China, and we will not accept, we will not support Taiwan independence. Nobody was really calling for that in one sense at that time, because the Kuomintang was in charge of Taiwan, and they believed in one China too, but they figured that we would be the one China, that we would ultimately defeat the People's Republic of China. But it became a problem at the point that especially the Independence Party, just in the last 20 years or so, began to take power. And then this was being utilized by the United States really as a hedge against the People's Republic of China, which they knew was going to grow to become a major political power. And they wanted to use every means possible to keep it weak, to divide and conquer. And so these games were being played in spite of the fact that legally the United States had accepted that fact. Now, what happened with Nancy Pelosi was interesting, because Nancy Pelosi is in Congress, but she's also Speaker of the House. That is a part of the U.S. government. She is the third in line for the presidency as Speaker of the House. So she would have to adhere to the policy of the U.S. government, the policy of which is that we recognize only the People's Republic of China. What it meant was that there will be no official delegations or recognition or official visits of U.S. officials to Taiwan. We have relations with Taiwan. We, have an institute there that can work together with Taiwanese on issues of health, on education, and all of these things. But no official will go there because it's not a recognized government by the United States. And so that when Pelosi decided in June initially she wanted to go, and then she got COVID, and that knocked that off. The Chinese protested immediately at that point, but then it kind of got delayed, so there was no big furor about it until she decided she was going to do it now in August. The Pentagon, the White House put out the report. Biden put out a report saying that the Pentagon is opposed to this. He didn't say that the White House is opposed to this, because it may be some people were, and maybe he was opposed to it, but wasn't going to say it because he figured he'd get political flack as being, pro-China. So he didn't do that, but he did say that the Pentagon is opposed to it. Pentagon talked with Pelosi about this. And the Chinese already were raising a furor, saying, look, she can't come there. She's a part of the government, and that, Taiwan is a part of China, and so she can't go there and treat it as some kind of an official visit by somebody at that high level. Pentagon realized this and told Pelosi that was the case. The White House apparently also privately had discussions with her, but she decided she was going to go anyhow. But the problem is that she had a case of hubris. And sometimes people think that hubris is a good thing. They think it's like chutzpah, doing the thing that's dangerous and everything. It's not. What it is, in the ancient Greeks, this was a major sin. That it's really kind of you try and do that which is not according to natural law. That is, you try and outwit the gods, and this leads to trouble. It's like the story of who was it, Icarus, who wanted to fly close to the sun, and he burned up. That's hubris, right? That's a problem. That's what she had a problem with, and I think she had a problem with it because she knows she's going to be out in November. I mean, she's going to be dead meat. This is her swan song, and she was determined that I'm going to poke China in the nose here before I go in my role as speaker. Come hell or hot water, hell or high water. And it's like the French Revolution, who was Louis XV said, "After me the deluge." This is the kind of attitude she had in that. And I don't know if she expected the intensity of the reaction. I think maybe the Pentagon kind of did, although I think they didn't expect as much as they did get. But what did happen, of course, is when Pelosi's plane landed, there was a flotilla of Su-35 jets taking off from China that flew across the Taiwan Strait. It's not clear where they went, but they probably crossed. Obviously they crossed the halfway line between Taiwan and China. And this has been done before, and maybe they did even more. In addition, fleets were deployed to 5 different areas surrounding the island of Taiwan. And it was announced, this was on Tuesday, and it was announced that starting on Thursday, there would be live fire operations, that is live fire maneuvers, in these 5 areas that the various fleets, both sea, air, and probably ground troops, although there was no landing or anything, but it was a full force operation, included what was called the Eastern Theater, which is responsible for Taiwan, but also many others, and included the rocket forces, strategic rocket forces. So what happened then, I guess last night at 12 o'clock it started, that they started firing off this, missiles and the like into the sea. But they were in areas, as it was explained by the military guy who was doing this. It was like a prelude for what they would do if they had to invade Taiwan. I mean, it was a show of force as what could happen if we have to do this. And it caused, of course, a furor. Now, in fact, some of these rockets landed in the Japanese Sea, in Japanese territory, and they were, of course, all freaked out about that. But what happened was that this tipped the scales. This was a bridge too far. That China had received personally from the President of the United States the guarantees that we do support the one China policy, and that we will not support independence of Taiwan, just a few days before Pelosi landed. But as soon as she went there, I mean, it was just the opposite. This has happened many, many times, but this was at a very high level. She went there and she said, we have to parade this Taiwan democracy because we have to show how much it is better than what there is across the Taiwan Strait. And so she met with Tsai Ing-wen, who's the president of Taiwan. She met with the foreign minister. She met, most importantly, with the producers of semiconductors. Taiwan produces more semiconductors than anyone else in the world. They sell them to China, they sell them to the United States, and sell them everywhere. And the United States, of course, is very keen in their, economic warfare against China to get those semiconductors. But there was a discussion at the Wall Street freaked out, of course, about all of this, because this is like the China trade. This is, for the biggest headache in the world for 'em. And they were mooting the possibility that what the Chinese could do, they could put a blockade on Taiwan, and they couldn't get out semiconductors. And there goes the computer industry. But, we don't know. It's not over yet. Believe me, the maneuvers are not over yet. The maneuvers are going on for 72 hours. They started last night, and they'll go on for 3 days, and I think Sunday morning. So they're going to be firing off these things. I think they did the East China Sea, that is on the eastern part of Taiwan. They deployed in the Pacific Ocean on the other side of Taiwan, totally surrounded. And they did their firings there, and I think today they're doing firings in the Taiwan Straits, and they'll do more tomorrow. But and in addition, they also placed restrictions on Taiwan. They're no longer going to export sand to Taiwan, and sand is very important in construction, of course, for building, but it's also important. Certain type of quartz sand is important for semiconductors. Now that doesn't mean Taiwan doesn't have any, because they can get their own. But this was the largest part of their import of sand came from China, so this is going to be difficult. The other thing they did is that they banned the export of citrus fruits and fish. And of course, this is going to hit them very, very big, because that's a big export product for Taiwan. Obviously, an island in the ocean, they do a lot of that fishing, so that's going to hit them hard. But the attitude, and people were worried, they're going to take over Taiwan, and they probably could have, but I don't think they wanted to do that. That's not the policy. But what they are determined now to do is that they will now no longer accept the kind of crap that has been coming out of the United States on this, where they say one thing and do something else. So that doing something that is not consistent with this idea of supporting the one China policy, they will react. The day after Pelosi was in Taiwan, the Chinese ambassador to Great Britain held a press conference, because the British, obviously they want to send a foreign affairs parliamentary delegation there, and he warned them, look, if you do that, there's going to be reprisals. And so that you've got a situation now where China will react in some way, in a tough way against these kind of things. They've gotten to the point to say, we're not going to accept this double standard, saying one thing and you doing something else. You got to do what you say, or else we're going to react on this. Now, the fact of the matter is that this places themselves in a very important position. And if we saw over the last few days, there have been a lot of statements being made by various governments, government representatives and the like, reiterating the fact that they support, some of them said, we support China and we condemn this visit, but all of them were clear on that we support the one China policy. The United Nations, even Guterres himself, the United Nations announced it yesterday. They made a statement on this. We're asked a question. They made a statement, yes, our policy is the one China policy. Guterres today said, this is what we're doing. This is our policy as well. So what China is saying, and is that we're just, asserting our own sovereignty, our own territorial integrity, and the world has accepted that. The world has accepted that Taiwan is a part of China. So how can the U.S. play these games? So that the onus is on the U.S. in this situation. And the Chinese have been very clear. Pelosi says, we're here because it's democracy and we support democracy everywhere. And the Chinese said, well, take care of your own democracy, which isn't a problem. But this is not the question. The question is one of sovereignty. And that's a legal matter. And that's a legal matter that has been accepted by, I don't know how many countries, 157 countries have accepted the one China policy. it is a part of the UN resolution in 1971 that brought China into the United Nations. So it's really a different world now. I mean, they really have got the wind at their backs because this is supported by the majority of the world population. There was a reaction, yesterday by the G7. I haven't seen a White House statement on this. I'm sure there has been one, but I haven't seen it. And at any rate, there wasn't anything dramatic said by the U.S. But what they did was typical of the Biden idea that we won't do anything alone. We'll do it with our allies. The G7, I think the British got the G7, according to reports, to make this statement, of course, with the okay of the United States, where they said they condemned the actions of the Chinese on this thing and said this is really outrageous. And then they said little thing about, but of course every country has its own view on that accepting the one China policy, which really didn't fly. And the Chinese said this is just a total farce. This is not acceptable. The G7 is not someone that can say anything with regard to that. So they wouldn't even accept that anymore. I mean, they really feel that the wind is at their back, that they are moving in that direction. They do have a correct policy, and that these other countries really have accepted the notion that Taiwan is a part of China. Wang Yi also was at an ASEAN meeting today, and they all, of course, were supportive of that. So the United States has found itself in a very difficult situation because of this hubristic action by Ms. Pelosi, and I think she's going to start catching it again. Look, you had I haven't followed much of the U.S. press reportings. New York Times and Washington Post are not important so much, but you had, I guess, the New York Post and some of the other papers have gone out to really explain what this one China policy is. They're saying that this is something that the U.S. had accepted, in establishing the relations with the People's Republic of China. And, the underlying idea here is that Pelosi violated this. So she may very well be in trouble. I mean, she got support. She got support from somebody, the usual hacks. Mike Pompeo, who I saw a picture of him after he made a statement supporting Pelosi. He's lost a lot of weight, because he kind of looked like Jumbo the elephant, and he figured that was not very presidential. So he went on one of these diets so that he would look more like a human being. But I don't think he really succeeded in that. And then you had this has-been Newt Gingrich, who made the same kind of trip as Speaker in 1979, and there was a furor over that as well. But the tension between China and the United States was not as great, so it didn't lead to this kind of a breaking point. But he goes out and says, Newt Gingrich, who is he? He's a born-again evangelical Catholic. I guess he took his lot of sins and figured if he changed from Protestantism to Catholicism, he could go to confession, and that he would be forgiven. He doesn't know that the priests always say there after confession, "Go and sin no more." But I don't think he can follow that. But these are the guys that are supporting me, and some of the Republicans, of course, are doing that. But I think, even some of the people, and I don't know the reasons why they didn't do that, but Pelosi had asked a number of other people. There were a few of these characters, Engler, and a few others who were on this delegation. But she had asked the head of the Foreign Relations Committee to go, and they backed down. I mean, they had a pretext for it, but they didn't want to go. And I think they really felt that this could blow up in their faces if they did something like this, and it led to a potential conflict. And it still may. We don't know. We don't know what the Chinese look. This is just the beginning, and Sunday's not going to be the end of it. I mean, I'm sure there's a whole array of things that they've got planned with regard to reprisals against Taiwan and against the United States. And in terms of the Taiwan situation, of course, I mean, there are many people there. Look, Taiwan's economy is really dependent on China. They have benefited immensely from this increased trade over the last, 20 years since, early 1990s when they did establish economic relations with China for the first time. And, a lot of firms and companies going back and forth the whole time, they're going to suffer very much by this. And it may lead to political trouble for the DPP, or the Independence Party that's in power now, which I don't think there are elections until 2024, but it could be very problematic because what Tsai Ing-wen, the Taiwanese president, was thinking, if we get the support, you get Pelosi here, and they did want her there, that Taiwan could not send an invitation because that would be a violation of the One China policy, and Taiwan is not a nation, right? So that would have reprisals. But there was a wink and a nod that if you come, this could be great. She thought, okay, I'll just go on Pelosi's coattails, and Taiwan will be home free. That ain't going to happen. And who knows what they're going to do. The Chinese have said also that these maneuvers, these extensive maneuvers, they could do it again. I mean, they're prepared to do it, again. I mean, it's not over. That part is not over at all. And the reaction of the United States is going to be interesting to see because it will determine, if it comes to a real kind of conflict. The problem is the same. The situation is different in one sense from Ukraine, but it's the same in terms of the U.S. attitude. The U.S. attitude was that we control the world. We can tell people what to do because we are the United States. Right? We have the power. We are the hegemons. And this was what was reflected also in Pelosi, right? That I am the Speaker of the House in the greatest country in the world, and therefore I can ignore natural law. I don't have to pay attention to it. And so now it blows up in her face, and we'll see what happens. Also interesting stuff in terms of the meeting that she was having because she went to a number of countries. Beforehand, she went to Singapore, she went to Malaysia, and I'm not sure if she went to Indonesia, and she met with people there. And the general message that they gave her, at least in Singapore and I think probably in Malaysia, was that it's not a good thing to go to Taiwan because you're going to rock the boat and it will be trouble for the entire region. And she ignored those warnings as well. So then she's going to go to South Korea and Japan. The part of one is a member of the Quad. She'll meet the Japanese Prime Minister tomorrow, and South Korea, they're at least leaning kind of in that direction. It's not, they have a new administration that's rather conservative, but he didn't meet with her. And she did go to South Korea, and President Yoon was on what he called a staycation. That is not going on vacation because of the COVID, but you take it easy, right? So he was on staycation and didn't have time to meet her. He called her, and he talked about how important the U.S. South Korea relationship was. He didn't want to burn his bridges entirely, but he really stayed away from it because he knew what effect that might have. I think because he knew what effect it would have from the Chinese. So the fact that Pelosi did that has created a new sense of confidence in the Chinese leadership that they do have the support of the world. They didn't want to start a war because they didn't want to, they know what would happen, with the United States if it was felt that this was not necessary. But in this case, what they did, the show of strength, indicated the great concern they have with this particular principle that is the basis of the U.S. China relationship and the basis of a relationship with every other country that they have a relationship with. I think that strengthened people who understood that, that this is what we said and this is what we should adhere to because China is very important and they're actually doing a very good job in terms of, helping countries move forward. So I think their attitude is that they can win this battle on the international arena, and they will use the strength. They're not going to back down from this, these kind of insults and the like. but they're doing it in such a way that they're doing it from a position of principle. This is for them. This is the rule of law. They are adhering to the rule of the law. This is the law. The United Nations said it. These countries have said it. So this is what we have to do. So it's just a very interesting but dangerous situation that has developed. And it could be, it's like, with the Chinese say, every crisis, there are two characters to crisis. One means opportunity, and one means danger, Wei Ji. And it could be an opportunity because it's, given the fact that they're not going to win this war in Ukraine, that the Ukrainians are not going to. They're not going to get out of this without some kind of diplomatic solution, and the Chinese on their own turf, in their own front, I think have won the battle in world public opinion, and it still remains to be seen. What's going to happen after this. There will be a rough time ahead. There will be other stuff coming out, and the only way I can see that will change is, and the Chinese have said that too. They issued, the Foreign Ministry issued a statement of the, I don't have it in front of me, but the 5 no's, no to Taiwan independence, and all the things that were implied with the 3 communiques and the commitment of the United States have got to be followed up in action. That the United States has got to do something that indicates that they are working consistent with the commitments that they made. Unless they do that, this is going to continue in a very tumultuous manner. But I think the message here is, I think, very much optimism. I mean, even I'm sure there were some Chinese I know there were who, when this happened, they said, "Oh, that's great. Now they can just take Taiwan." But that wouldn't have been a good idea. I mean, but you see the spirit. Look, this is supported within China. China was a great nation. I mean, they were the greatest nation in the world for centuries. When Europe was in the Dark Ages, right, or even earlier in the barbarian age, China was a developed country, developed language, developed science, astronomy, all of this stuff. And this was stopped at the point where they decided not to develop science and technology, not to take this from the West after the Renaissance occurred. That was a big mistake they made, and it went downhill, and then the whole West went in there and just wreaked havoc in these things. It's interesting in the statement, and this is knowledge. This is like the be-all and end-all of the ordinary Chinese understanding of their history is they know this stuff. And it's interesting, the Foreign Ministry, when they issued a statement in regard to this so-called G7 statement, they said it's like the what they call the eight power statement in the 1860s, where there was some missionary was killed, and then all these 8 countries came in, including the United States, and took over Beijing, went into the summer, beautiful summer garden, summer palace that they had that had been designed by some of these, Renaissance and Rococo artists, and they burned the whole thing and stole everything. Those ruins are still there. People go there. Chinese go there all the time to see what devastation these guys have done. They're not rebuilding it. They do rebuild models of it, but not rebuilding this because they want to make this conscious, to every Chinese of what happened to them. And so coming out of that, there is this, I think this, when Xi Jinping says this is the wish of 1.4 billion people, there's probably a lot to that, that there's a support in this thing that, unlike anything that we see in the West at this point, in terms, maybe we compare it to like what it was like during World War II, and when after Pearl Harbor, where you had the nation united in a way that it hadn't been united before. This is what you have in China in regard to these kind of things. So that's an important issue as well. And even in certain sense in Taiwan, there are many people there who still feel that they are part of this greater Chinese history and are very proud of the fact of what China has become today out of the devastation that had existed previous to this. And that really lies latent in the heart of most of the Chinese on both sides of the strait. And that's also an important element in this whole predicament. So that's pretty much what I had to say on this